So, hello everyone. Excuse the delay, and we're lucky to have Universal Board Games here today, who are going to present their game, Our World 2. So I've been aware of Vicky and Mehmet for maybe 15 years or so.
Maybe a bit more.
And that's particularly through community engaged projects in Hackney, a community garden. Also, they teach Tai Chi, and they're active with their business, which is particularly about play and an internationalism. Their work is very much connected with social change and social justice, and using games and play as a means for co-authorship, where participants have a stake in the story or the narrative of the game. So in terms of giving voice to people who often are voiceless, they've been real change makers, and we're lucky to have them here today. So I'm going to sign off now and
Thanks, Rob.
and let the games begin.
No, just keep playing.
Just keep playing.
There we go. Now we can keep playing because that's us introduced. Do you want to go?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'm just trying to think. There's people online, but I have no idea how to do that.
Again, no, I'm
Hello.
There's an illustrator.
Oh, hello. Very welcome.
Because I think you should fight back.
Yeah. Nice to meet you. We're just going through a story, and everyone's telling their response to it using these cards.
so it's, I often
It might
tell
be
people
a
that
better decision to record it secretly than to have it as evidence.
so it's sort of like
He's fighting
my
back.
idea of that was that he feels
Back in
But
it.
not
Yeah.
because of the gloves. It's quite violent.
like Diego was doing, because I'm not in that situation. I would
But
sort
I
of
think
pause and
I very much
rethink
connect the
about
text with the
what is
image.
being wanted,
Yes.
apart from owning yourself.
Yeah.
You have to,
That's why they.
Yeah.
so you have to pick three
Yeah.
cards, and then you're able to like, make a story about what you might do in that situation. How you can relate to it.
What your response would be, or how that makes you feel,
Yeah.
or maybe something that you've experienced along that same
Yeah,
line.
that's react.
But that we do one at a time, so we're doing one experience from a young person. These are all collected from young people across Hackney. Yeah, we're just finishing this one.
The
and
idea,
we'll start another one.
the idea is that
Yeah?
you don't want people
Yeah.
to think, I just
Join
want
in.
to want to react, so I want to pick that, or I want to meditate
There you
with
go.
all my responses. So they pick that. So they deliberately put it in there, but hidden.
Yeah.
So
you're
it's not.
thinking
So you
just own it
focus
and
image and
sit
on the
with
word.
it. It's kind of what you were saying a little bit
That's
as well,
just
isn't
like
it?
an off
It's
the
like just be yourself and just
dimension.
kind of yeah.
Otherwise,
Yeah.
It's true. It's
when we're
interesting, isn't
testing
it?
it, people are going,
Well,
I
that's
just
exactly
always
what I
react
picked.
once. I just
My first response was try not to take it personally, because well, you'll just go a little bit mad, won't you? I think it's kind of what you were saying as well. Is that you can't
Because you
really
just try to
change how you look.
Yeah,
So
that's
you've
the
just
whole
gotta
idea. You've got
keep
10
doing
seconds
you,
to
keep being you,
pick your card.
and maybe eventually people will catch up and get the idea
Yeah,
that
next
everybody
one.
doesn't look the same and everybody doesn't come from the same place, and it is colourist. You know, they're looking, obviously, he's black, and they're looking and saying, well, you must be Jamaican because you're black. So, I don't think, this is 2021. Ah, excellent. Would you like to tell us your response? Go for it. Yeah. Well, everyone. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what they put in the video. Hold your tongue.
Hold your tongue. From your perspective, just don't say anything.
Because
Okay.
Say hello.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that's fair enough, isn't it? That's a fair.
I'd stay calm, unfair. They were the first.
Of those, can we vote? What do you think? What's your feeling? Which response resonated with you? You don't even have to vote, but you can just sort of say. I think it's quite interesting what you said,
Which is a kind of
because it's like obviously it's making. it's creating some feelings inside, but you've decided to police yourself and not
Yeah.
to respond in a difficult way in it. Keep the peace. I think that's very interesting. And I think it's very honest response, actually. Because, yeah, I'm sure with all of us there's something like that going on. What do you think, guys? It's okay. It's a time to just speak
Depends on
and say.
situations, doesn't it? Yeah, you don't know. You might feel like they're drunk, or I don't want to gauge with them at all. And
How much openness there is.
yeah,
Yeah. But it still has an effect. Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Should we try another card? In fact, you want to just turn it over and see. So what we did, we designed this with young people, 3 different things. They did the drawings, they did responses, and then separately they did what might be a headline
like
for that
record it
story.
secretly. It's like
What does it say? I can't read it.
retaliate intelligently. You think, okay, I'll record this and we'll deal with
Kind
this
of what we all
later.
said, isn't it?
That's an example of it.
Yours is quite, it's interesting. There's no right or wrong, is there? It's a different response.
Yeah, it does.
Like the fact that each of these is a spectrum of quality.
Yeah.
It's not obvious.
Yeah, and that's the whole.
Yeah, well, and
See
it's
some
exactly
cars
what that
where
one
they're
is.
like, yeah,
You
that
just,
one,
oh,
you know,
yeah,
being the
whatever.
president.
He's like, I haven't got a
That's press
clue.
meditate one, or it might be hold your breath for 10 seconds and not respond way because you think, risk it.
Yeah.
that
Yeah. It's interesting. It's quite an interesting headline, isn't it? So should we muddle them in again? And someone else like to read? Do you want to choose one? Do you want to choose another scenario? Go and lay them so that we can, another story. If you want to, I don't mind. Yeah? Or you can just open and pick one.
Okay, so work with them. She's the only nurse who's
Yeah, because I spoke to the girl and she's basically said when she's in the hospital,
To see them all?
she's going, other nurse patients
just choose
will go, I don't want that black woman.
They're all quite interesting. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, tending me, but they're going, she's all right because she's lighter skin. You can.
Oh,
And I often get that.
Because it's too confusing.
That's what happens a lot.
That's more of a fact.
What's the difference between this one and this one? This one's being racist and this one's telling me to stop.
No, they're the same. It's just that it got repeated for different reasons.
Everyone hear that? Go on again. So I have
That's
witnessed
racist.
black people and white people being treated differently.
That's racist.
How does that make you feel? Or what's your response? Or have you experienced that? Or
No, I think I was thinking too much of this word.
Well, you see that and it makes you, yeah, it's just only one letter change. So you've only got 10
they are
seconds.
double-sided, so you can have a little flick over.
And it,
Leave it to it and just check if these guys are okay.
yeah. Or TikTok, it'll be like, you've got
You're
10
over here.
seconds.
You've got lag space.
Scan it and then just go, right,
Somehow I'm
that,
better
and
with
that,
daylight.
and then come up with a story. Yeah, that would do. That's the next level going. Come round the fog.
These ones and the yellow ones.
I didn't do it.
Not so much. I don't think so. I think they just randomly colour. Yeah, it was. We had to leave some of their design bits in.
And what perspective? Do we take this as kind of like from the perspective of the person who's saying it, or the
Well-
perspective of the person that it's aimed at?
You can choose either. It doesn't matter.
Okay.
It doesn't matter. You know, some things they might directly resonate with you, or you might have to think, oh, well, what about somebody else's? How would that make them feel?
Everyone happy? Everyone got one?
you're missing one.
Oh, yes, and Creed, is it?
No, it doesn't have to be free.
Oh, really?
Because that was my
I
clue.
think it's
No,
on this
no, it
one.
doesn't have to
By
be
the time
free.
I'm 20,
If you're happy with the two you've got, that's fine.
Read that.
Three's just recommended.
Read that at the end.
oh,
What we did is we collected stories in one workshop because we did many different workshops. And then after we had all the stories, we got a different group to write a possible headline, just a possible headline that they might see
Yeah, and
to
that's
go
what
with
I've
that
heard.
story. So that's just sort of like an after thing, but what we'd really like you to do is just discuss how that statement, what it brings up in you when you hear that. That's all it is. Just as simple as that.
And then when does the back?
Well, once you've done that, and then you've listened to each other and maybe decided which one resonates with you, which one you like the story of, then this is just
Cool.
it's almost a reflection.
Anyone next?
Because mostly, like on social media or in the media, most people will only read the headline. They're not going to read the whole thing.
Because mine's based on both of the sides.
That's okay.
I didn't know that.
It's okay.
Am I forgiven?
Yes, it doesn't matter. But it's just so you can explain. I'm just trying to explain the kind of mechanism and the thinking behind it. This one's the kind of story, the true experience, and then this is the headline that might go with it. Because there's many different headlines that could go with that.
What did you say?
Yeah.
I'll support that.
And this is really top benefit.
Nice.
And just be yourself.
Beautiful. Yeah. Stop judging people for whatever. Economics, social, anything. Beautiful. You see?
I
But
chose.
the thing is,
Quite right.
all at some point might be on benefits.
I was.
You know,
That's
that's why we
funny.
pay taxes. It's
Yeah.
a safeguard to make sure that, you know, if we end
You
up
gotta be patient as well
having
with that one.
children or
But you
losing our
also
job
gotta
for whatever
realize that
reason,
this
it's a
is
safeguard.
there.
It's a kind of like, you know,
You
help
must do
and
something
support.
about it, and so
Us all.
finally you should protest
Exactly.
Just kind of like
somehow
person
to maybe not to the patient themselves, but to your superior. Or
Beautiful. Is everybody
do something
gone?
about it.
No, nobody's gone.
Otherwise-
Only Chelsea.
Well, go on then. Who wants to explain their reaction?
I'll go next. I'm a single mum, and actually it's really hard to get out of the struggle of being on benefits. It's like
Like a regular
you want to do
situation.
better, you want to get a full-time job, but the minute you earn too much, they take it away from you. So it's really hard to get out of that rut. Obviously, I work. I do work. I just get topped up.
But actually being a single mum is work, right?
Blimey.
That is
Yeah.
work.
Full-time
You are
job.
working.
I've got two
You don't need to-
children, and one of them's on the spectrum. He's quite severely disabled. So yeah, it's hard work.
Not
And obviously
necessarily
trying to find the time to do
full-blown
everything.
protest, but like something that
And obviously, when someone says that to you, you feel ashamed.
Yeah.
You know, given half the chance, you wouldn't want to be in
Yeah.
that situation.
Yeah.
You wouldn't say, what else have you got?
Yeah.
But bring up kids is really, really, really
And really important and really difficult.
Exactly.
I think that the
Yeah,
Exactly that.
I'm with you.
context I felt like I was
I've picked
witnessing,
fight back
I
because you
feel
don't
like I've
have to
been
be
here
stuck in that
before
route. You
in a
can
situation
take your life.
with Cotswold
Yeah.
House or the
With
Gloucester
Cotswold.
House.
Whichever way you need. Whatever. Yeah, exactly. Just fight it.
Just fight it. This is it. You know,
Yeah.
I'm 37 and I made the choice to come back into education this year
Brilliant.
and change my life. So yeah.
You
fight
see?
back.
So fighting back works. You're like, no, come on.
Exactly.
Love it.
I'm not 22 years in an
Yeah.
office I've done, and yeah, never again.
Good. There's a choice. I love it.
Exactly.
Good on you.
rage or response.
Come on, that's beautiful. Next, would you like to go?
And then to try and
You got the
use
gist of it now.
the situation or
Does that make you more sense?
be a better
So
way,
I
but to
guess
problematize
since I'm
it,
over 20, I
kind of
guess
play it up, and this,
I
you know,
kind of thought if I was told this when I was like
this is
18, 19 after
acceptable
finishing
behaviour in a way of
college,
possibly
how I would react. And at the time, I was homeless, so
Wow.
That's tough. Yeah.
the benefits helped me kind of survive.
That's what they're
So I
for.
just
Yeah.
wouldn't listen,
generational kind of
stay calm and keep trying to get out of the situation I was in.
Yeah.
not just
Oh.
racism, it could be homophobia.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah.
It could be a whole
Yeah.
bunch of different issues,
There you go.
whether that person
I
will
didn't
ever
really
learn
know
or
what
know.
It's fine. It's whatever.
I guess I would understand if anybody going through that would feel pressure because obviously
They die.
to hear that would probably
Yeah.
be very disheartening.
Young
Or,
people, like,
you know,
it's like just
uh,
young,
so
young people younger than you
feeling
guys as
pressure
well,
would
and how
probably be given when
switched
being in
on,
that situation.
kind,
Patience
active and angry.
would probably
So
be
many,
one
I
as
think that's
well
encouraging
because
being you're 50. I mean, I remember how
I
racist.
It's not going to be quick, is it? To change. It's not going to be quick.
Yeah, really.
maybe
Yeah, it was.
like knock a few
Nowhere
minutes
near
before you
that.
do
It was.
because obviously you wouldn't stay calm the
It's
whole
like your
time.
cards back, isn't it? Hang on to your cards. Don't put your cards back in until you
Put
finish.
back
I know.
and turn them the wrong way.
Oh, don't worry.
And then strong. I would think that anybody in that situation would be as strong. I have to deal with that. So
Beautiful. Nice. Just hang on to your cards before I'll show you a little thing.
Yeah, society.
Well, that's okay. That's also a response, isn't it? So it's just like, don't know. Someone over there said, maybe there should be a card that says, I don't know. So that's fine. It's a response, isn't it?
These are
No
all
worries.
the
Go.
stories are
Next.
real.
I think that I react solely on the headline.
That's all right. That's fine.
Because, yeah, so I picked shocked because I can't imagine that someone can say that. Like, why don't you say instead of
Whitewashed or this or that.
Here's a shocking headline.
absolutely unnecessary. Because obviously
That's
the
a
system
no.
is, this is how the system works. Some people need benefits, and
Yeah.
as long as they can receive help.
It could be, because there's endless. The structure is the same. You can have endless stories. You can make your own ones up from your own experiences and use these cards to choose from. Or even add more cards.
To understand their point of view,
But that's a beautiful thing, though, to
It's
realize.
just to get you started, to get you
Yeah.
thinking about it. And listen to others.
Lovely. Well, look, there's another little level to the game as well. So then you would
Oh,
do the
we went-
headline, but that's fine. Don't worry about it. And the little shapes
We went
on your
to the
cards, there's a little code on them. It's just so that you can have a little reflection on yourself. So if you've got the little yellow half
Girl
circle,
score.
that's a reactive response. If you've got the orange circle, you would ignore it. You would tend to ignore things and just try not to react at all. And the little pink triangle
Always.
is it more meditative. You'd spend a little bit more time and think about it, think it through. So you can just check your cards, and clock for yourself. Look, you've got a react and a
That's
meditate.
how come up.
Oh, two meditate. Get you. Because when we made it with kids 13 to 18-years-olds, obviously the 18-year-olds came up with the more
Yeah, Universal Ball Games were a charity.
reactions. Fight
set
back.
up
There's a
to
12-year-old, I remember her. My mum said, just hit them. Okay. I mean, it's valid. But when you get a bit older, you'll think of other things as well.
Mainly young people.
So you can just,
but
can you see that? So you've got an ignore and a meditate and an ignore. Oh, it's quite interesting. There's a little bit of a, you know, so you can kind of give yourself a little bit of self-reflection.
designed it. Young people designed it.
Well, that's fine. And that's where you are at the minute, so that's fine. That makes sense.
I don't like confrontation.
Oh, stop it, you.
I really don't.
I've only just met you.
I think she's been a bit
No, what happened was
disagree.
all the drawings.
Would you like to go through,
Sketch
do
the
one
young
more from the
ways.
beginning? Now you know kind of the order of it. So someone choose a card from here, read out the story,
Uniform.
do your responses as quick as you can. So just 10 seconds, boom, 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 quick, take them. And then,
So that's why they're all
no, but you
like,
did good. That interesting, it's beautiful.
They're
Oh,
all
and if
their
you were
own
going to
actually
vote,
design,
sorry, what I
yeah,
did
so
forget
do
to
that.
say, if you were going to vote for whose story touched you the most, I mean, I know who I'm voting for in that one. Yeah, you got my card in that one. Because it's from real stories and real experiences, and they're super important to know about. And yours.
Yeah.
That's called colours.
You going to read it? Oh, you okay? I'll read it. You okay?
oh, cool.
Oh, lovely. I just don't mind me.
I'm not sure if I'm doing this right, but
There's no right in me.
so,
Don't worry. Just tell him he's a...
right,
are the whole answers.
right. So I mean, for
How's this one going?
Yeah,
I think if I were
just
to
pick a
pick
story.
What's the story?
I would feel
So when I was
curious
young, I felt closer to
I
the
think,
teachers than the other students,
Yeah.
the pupils.
Yeah,
I would feel
yeah.
also pressured.
When I was younger, I was closer to the teachers than kids
And
in school.
I think it would
Sometimes I felt like
take
I trust the other
self-awareness
kids
and
in
self-confidence to also
Yeah, so a
be
few of
able
them that come up
to
with that story,
manage
they'll be
it.
like,
But I think there's another aspect of it. It's not only being
all
the
these
victim of it,
stories
but being
here,
a person who's standing by it.
situations.
yeah, they're all real life experiences,
And,
stories from
so
young people
that person could
across
also feel
different areas of
sad
Hackney.
and
So we
pressured
worked with
to act on it.
Our
You
Ladies
know,
Girls
because I think a
School,
lot of people stand by without acting. And that
Orthodox
is
Jewish
something
Girls
that
School,
requires
Adventure
self-awareness also.
Playground,
So I think there are two things. One is being the
an
victim, and one is
estate
being
community,
witness to the victim.
this sort of area.
That could be. So that's my
Just a few other
Yeah,
people
hang on to
sort of
those because we'll
random
do a bit of
places
self-reflection on that in a minute.
that
Is everybody else gone? Or are you just going?
No,
Excellent.
So
like me, I'm so against about crimes.
Normally
form,
have, which I guess is the
sexual
point.
or
Which is the whole point.
religion, so
And also,
I'm protesting.
it can be played by young people, older people, both together, both here. Families can play it and actually get to listen to their younger ones.
Yeah.
So, I think they thought that, or I didn't know that was happening.
What's your
I
background?
try to be not rigorous because I have so many
Because
times.
whilst I did as sports scientist, and then went into games and play and venture programs and working with kids and venture programs, and then got into basically running board game workshops from games from all around the world, and then we got into at the same time. Yeah.
He's trying to translate from Ukrainian, like a Ukrainian swear word into English. Go ahead.
And we're like, yeah, we could do that. There's no games around.
Some praise to God, but some people pray to
Whatever
Satan.
the issue
They
is,
just say that I pray to Satan.
Oh my God. Yeah, they turn it.
Religion, but they just.
so all the drawings are there. They did all the drawings.
Nice, but that's a beautiful little collection of responses, isn't it?
I protesting also teacher.
But the drawings were just some scraps of paper, and we're going, here's the word, just 10 seconds, draw something.
Tell the difference between religions and comic people just to make a target for religion or something.
Yeah, very good. Good. Go.
When I think of hate crime, I think if it's like you can't be yourself when you're.
When does this bit? When does this?
They kind of very likely because
We do that
Afterwards, okay.
Yeah,
also feel that
it's a sort of headline you might come across.
and they are not very nice people. They
Sorry, go on.
Yeah.
They hateful. Someone else but
Am I going or you going?
I find it the action.
This is right, gentlemen
I don't
first.
find it doesn't make sense.
That's interesting. So you're looking at it and saying, well, hate coming from you, not me. It's your hate, not mine. It's beautiful.
Yeah, so I kind of find it pointless. It's like it doesn't make sense.
Yep, I totally agree. Yeah. It is very good. Very nicely put, though. Beautiful. Come on. I think you should be like Prime Minister. Come on. Why don't they be able to speak like that? They don't, do they? They make nonsense. Crazy things. Hiya. Good. We're just listening to people's reactions to a hate crime. Yeah, go on.
I just don't see it as a racial thing.
I guess both is the same thing.
Absolutely no reason to attack someone because of who they are.
Thanks for doing it. I'll just check if they're doing all right.
Again, I think just like taking a deep breath and not being too emotionally moved, being considered.
Who did that? What teacher? Such abuse of power. Listen to me, guys. This doesn't stop. It keeps going. Don't let them do it. People abuse their positions all the time. It's shocking.
I met him. It wasn't cool. It was a bit edgy. It was this park called the Shackle Arms. I used to DJ.
But they do. They're crazy. Some of these teachers. They're mad. Oh my God.
Close to me became a friend, Lloyd. And we went on this walk from Dalston, and he said he was angry.
Interesting. Beautiful.
African communities area and not a Caribbean area that he connected with. It's just like that was his and he's talking about racism within the black community, and it struck me. I mean, that was 20 years ago. I mean, I moved from Portsmouth, which is comparatively white.
Sometimes it happens.
He was my friend, you know, and for him to say something, and he's a bit older than me, 20 maybe.
But it's difficult. Beautiful.
But that was the first time I encountered that.
Very good. Oh, and there's another little level, guys, that I forgot to tell you before. So there's a little code on all your cards. So this is to help. This is just a little bit of self-reflection for you. So can I do this?
Yeah.
So look, if you've got this little symbol here on your card, that's a reactive response. Yeah, so you're just checking yourself. Oh, you've got 2, just saying. And then if you've got the little pink triangle, that's more of a meditative response. So you take a little bit more time, a little bit more thought. And the middle one is the orange circle. So that's just ignore it, and try to kind of pretend it's not
That's
there.
you now.
Really. So there's
Yeah,
3,
now
we
you
categorize them
speak
into
up,
3
but
different ways
then-
of responding. So you can just check your own out and have
Might
a
not
little
have the
look and
tools
think,
at that time to do that.
oh, you got 2
but now-
ignores.
Yeah, exactly.
And I love it. Can I
A lot
just
of
say
people are.
something? You pick
Especially when
that
it
card
comes to
every
us.
single time, which I love it. It's like his favourite card every single time he picks this one.
I think this
Do you see what I mean?
for like to have like in every primary school should be like a must.
And secondary schools. Well, we designed it with 100 young people across Hackney, so it works.
From young to know all of this would be
Yeah,
such a nice
yeah.
thing.
I know,
I
and
think
be able
we'd
to just talk about it.
Better people that when we're older, if we knew all of this. You know what I mean?
I think it's starting to. I mean, I know that from my
Or a
my
small
experience
town
with
where
my
you
children,
know a lot of people.
their self-awareness and their respect for
Yeah.
others and
Everyone been?
way beyond anything it was in my
This lot, all of this, the young people that we worked with on this, I was just like, whoa.
You know, if I knew like all of this vocabulary and I like would understand so many more situations and things.
Or have different options. Just have. That's why we did it like this. So it's just if you've never seen it or you've never heard it or you've never thought about it, how are you going to do it? Would someone like to read the headline? That might be is that the story there that you've done?
No, that's the one we just did, I think.
Oh yeah. So turn it over. So that's what might have been the headline. What's your
Not
definition of a
necessarily
hate
paid,
crime?
but it
So,
can be
you could maybe see that on
But
social media,
sometimes
you
they
can see it
are.
in the paper. And the reason we did
We
those
got
is
them to
because
just say.
some people
well,
might only
what will
ever
go on
read
the back of that
the headline,
out of
because they never
cards.
actually read the story behind it. So that
Yeah.
has a different effect than if it's more creative
Yeah.
information.
Yeah.
So you love media. See how important it is what you guys are all studying now.
Yeah, some of
That
it
image,
when
that
I
one
put
image or that
together,
one
like, there's no
headline
explanation,
could have such
but,
an effect.
but we're like, no, just if you think that
You
should go on the back,
illustration?
fine.
Yeah.
There's no judgment. It's what do you think? You know, so they're like, oh, we'll put that on the back of that one on that.
You're going to do this.
Oh, you as well?
Because these were like double the
Illustration,
amounts, we laid them out, and they go, got to try and half this.
It's
What
only
would you put on the
November.
back? And they just- But they didn't have
It's
that
only
long to do
December.
it.
Take your time.
So that might be better. It might have made them make more connections.
Well, it's the same with, what was that card? That was a story?
Yeah, it's good stuff. Do you want to do one more? Because you haven't done one yet. Would you like to? Yeah, go on, join in. Do you want to
And so this is like,
put them all back in?
with a different group, we've got them to read the story, and they played the game, and then
You
think
can do, or
what headline
just
would
pick
they
one out.
read about that, you know.
And what you're going to do is read it out, and then as quickly as everybody pick two or three cards that can kind of illustrate your response to that statement.
What it really meant, and there's on the back of everyone there's different headlines that they made up.
They end up there.
Which comes from now a fashion.
Is tourism actually a word?
A new fashion. It is, yeah.
Specific.
Yeah.
To mean what?
Go for it.
It's used predominantly, yeah, it's used a lot within the black community. Right. People say,
You read it again?
Colourists.
As distinct from race.
Yeah, in terms of, you know, you're dark black, you're light black, and there's cards in there where, oh, the lighter skin you are, the better you are. Or, you know, there's and it's within all, quite a lot of different cultures where there is colorism within each race.
Oh yeah, then
So to speak.
And they're being taken care of.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Or I think it's saying,
fine, it's their own fault. Let's leave them.
but there's a good system to pick them up.
Matrix of responses.
Yeah, yeah,
I don't know what I'm-
yeah, exactly.
And then depending on the shape, it shows that you work out sounds. So whereas on this himself, it would be like.
Oh, can I play? Sorry, okay, I'll play.
While we're on this, just to show you another game called In Your Shoes. This was intergenerational, 2 levels. We'll do level 1 first. Basically,
There we go.
We worked
Ooh,
with a
that's
group
quite a
of
good
older
one.
people and a group of
Maybe
younger
not for this
people.
particular story.
And we asked them
They are
one
double-sided
question.
because we had so many responses. We had
Younger
to fit them
people
all in.
think older people are,
Yeah, you can flip them.
and older people
You good?
think
Everybody
younger
done?
people
Come on,
are.
that's got to be 10
Yeah?
seconds out.
That's the question.
Speedy response.
For now, this is
You got to
level
go for your gut reaction.
So I'm going to take a card. No, we normally divide
Nice, it's a
people
good
up
image, isn't it?
into, are you either an older
So the young
person
people did the
or you're a
images.
younger person?
They
Yeah?
did the drawings, and then Sachi and Sachi kind of homogenized them a
What's
little
the
bit.
age? Older, 50 above.
We made it, yeah. So we're a
Younger,
small charity
well,
called Universal Board Games.
20, 30.
You're from
Under
us.
30. So if
Yeah.
I give you...
I do graphic design.
Do you? Oh, this is perfect then, isn't it? So we had little scribbled drawings on bits of paper from the young people, and some of them I took out of the bin. Because they go like that and they draw it and they go, ooh, that's it. And they go, no. Yeah, but they're really good. And then we got them all homogenized together with Sachi and Sachi, and they printed it. But we had to fight with them to make sure they put the colours on, and to make them look like young people. All their images, when they came back the first time, they looked like middle-aged white people. I don't know how. Yeah. But these weren't that young. These were 13 to 18, so they were good drawings. They were better. Who wants to go? Who wants to go and do their response?
If you've got these cards, if we can, you don't have to use this card, but if we are, then you argue for an older person saying that older people.
Sell it. You've got to sell it.
Yeah.
But it's also the picture.
All the pictures were drawn by the older people. They did all the drawings. They did all of them.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah?
So I'm speaking on behalf of all the people here.
Yeah.
Who they thought said it about who.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine that older people maybe think that younger people think they're interesting. Because there's an assumption that all their experience and knowledge and
Beautiful, yeah. Excellent.
on the surface available for young people to sort of see. Or at least an expectation or a sense that it ought to be.
It's unfair
ought to be acknowledged maybe.
people feel obvious. See a much better.
I mean, older people would hope that younger people would believe that they were interested. We have lots of sort of systems, I suppose, which is set up where older people try and communicate with younger people, to try and impart something.
Did younger people think older people are interested, or did older people think younger people are interested?
Yeah.
That's the question. Yeah, go on.
They young person have that.
Yeah. So they're going to feel really unwell.
Yeah, they live their life. Well, they think that
And that's horrendous, isn't it? Yeah.
things that they haven't had before. As in new things that happen that
because
in the future,
it basically says,
you're like, oh, that's really interesting. That type of
yeah,
music,
it's your
I didn't know that
fault.
existed. So I think the older person probably think that youngers are actually pretty interesting.
Sorry. No, you're welcome. No worries, yeah.
I would say that from an older point of view, I'll be like, oh, younger generations can be like interesting. Why? Because some things that they do, they think they started a trend, but they didn't really. It was something that they were. So I'll be like, well, that's what you think. I don't really understand what you think, but it's interesting, kind of.
Yeah.
You know? Also, it's kind of like they all just have different points of views compared to.
Obviously they're not happy with the situation, and many of them.
But yeah.
Yeah, because I would have time in the future, though.
Yeah, sometimes they just want bad lucky, I'd say.
Yeah.
So I think that statement is ignorant. I mean, obviously there's a bit of truth in it, because you can just, just do anything without think about it. but I still think it's a bit ignorant.
But it still requires compassion. Not everyone has the same opportunities in life.
Exactly. Gone quickly, last two, because we're going to have to.
We have another talk.
Cool. You've got time though, but you have to do like super fast.
Yeah. Maybe I understood one of the things, but I understood different ways.
Yeah.
Every child has that pressure, like they have to make a choice to not get a homeless position, we say. They kind of feel like a danger for their future every time they have to make a choice.
Oh my God, yeah.
From the family, they feel so they have to make independent thinking, to think about what to do, and it's like, and it's very, yes.
It's tricky.
Yes.
Yeah, that's beautiful actually, and that's really from your point of view, from a younger person's point of view, because it is blooming difficult, isn't it, to find somewhere to live now? It was a wee bit easier for us. Not much. Go on, quick,
People
quick.
think older people.
I love that you're still angry.
Because they have choice to be or this or go to the charity. Like I know in my country, we have also charities for homeless people, and they build this charity for money to buy some drinks, not only drinks but some alcohol, and make some money because you have some free house, some free food, but they need the money for free alcohol. So that's why they leave the charity to just staying. They don't care if cold, if raining, they're staying outside.
Yeah, I hear you.
Staying calm because you never know. They just leave the charity, or it's they have a real problem with home, something like that. You never know.
True. Well said. Well said. Yeah, it's a wonderful other perspective, isn't it? I just picked these three. I picked deep because I think our attitudes towards homelessness go very deep because it's our own insecurity, because it's the last place that you want to be. So I feel that's why there's such a defensiveness and such a kind of an aggression towards homeless people. And maybe people should hold their tongue a little bit. You don't always have to say what you think. And perhaps be a little bit more conscious of the choices and the decisions and the attitudes, the judgments that you're making about other people and their situations. Like everybody said, there's lots and lots of reasons why. We don't know. We don't know.
I think it's a very smug attitude because you don't know what people are going through. There's an expression from where I come from.
I need to switch.
You could use the lollipop.
I can use those.
It's a very quick one.
Keep going.
That's much more intergenerational.
Think of something. I have no idea. Where are we? Oh, hi.
I can just.
Where do you want me to? Where do you want me to talk to?
Yes, I can. Go to the shop.
Students' attention, break the flow.
Yeah. Well, I will do that, obviously. Yeah. Do you want me to use which mic do you want me to use?
You're live now, so.
Shall I just keep going? Am I just addressing this way? I know, but somewhere I've just come out of the shop. Where do you want me?
Yeah, I reckon on the corners, perfect.
Oh yeah.
We're going to wrap up. So Vicky's going to.
Okay, I just want to quickly do this. Quick wrap.
Should we ease off? Are they just going to finish?
Quick round on the younger older game.
Statement doesn't give a clear
Go on then. That's the lie. Intergenerational. It worked really well though, didn't it? For goodness sake. So sweet. So funny. The characters. Hilarious. Because you cannot hide who you are. You know what I mean? Because you just say what. The Polish guy's hilarious. Oh, am I?
No, so yes.
Yeah.
Are you on?
Yeah.
It's day-to-day requirements, so yeah, we get the talent. To the school, and he's brilliant at mimicking. Like
And you'd have to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we won't do it. Yeah. I was going to do. I did it with that table.
I think we might have to just do it another time.
We can do it
It's
another
nearly
time.
two, isn't it?
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yes. Yeah. We're going to have to ease off now. I don't have time to do this one with you, but
hello.
You can ask them because they've been playing it. It's this one.
Hey guys, do you want to just ease off in your groups? Yeah, and obviously, look, you're all facing me now. Thank you. I'd just like to say, I don't know what's the best thing to say. Thank you for your honesty, being here today and sharing your stories and your experiences with each other. Myself and Rob have got goosebumps because it's so nice to hear. And I'm hoping that you can take something away from today that will be really useful in the years, well, especially this year to come, in terms of illustration or in terms of designing to get people involved and get people engaged and to really find out about other people. Super important. And then kind of base your decisions on that. But I'd like to say thank you very much. And I hope you find it very useful.
What was it?
I don't know, what was the answer?
What was that, sorry?
It was young people think older people are underestimated.
Ah, young people.
I think it's just quite sympathetic.
And then the next level, which was a different, we didn't get to play, and maybe is the red cards. These are different.
Hi everyone. Sorry, can I just grab your attention very briefly because we're going to be moving to the next session. So we're going to be having Darren Ellis, who's going to be talking a bit further about social media and the interaction of social media on our creative practice. Darren is going to be presenting on the screen. He's not physically coming into the room. So you probably need to make sure that you're staring at the screen. So I'm going to hand back over to Rob.
On? Am I live?
You should be live, Darren. I think
Okay.
they're popping over. So give us, I'll count you in a moment.
Yeah. Hi, I'm not sure if you can see me or hear me at the moment.
Probably.
Hi, Darren. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Cool. I'm just in the room now, so the students are just setting up some chairs, and then we'll be able to start with you soon.
Excellent. Okay, I'll just sit here. I'll share my slides if you can let me know. If you
Literally, like 30 seconds.
Yeah. Can you see my slides? Or is it just me?
Hey, hi Darren. So we've the audience is now they've got their seats, so I guess we're good to start. So maybe you could introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about your discussion. Thanks.
Okay. Can you all see my slides? Just wondering if you can see them at the moment, just before I start.
I think Craig is going to, yeah, we can see your slides now. Perfect.
Excellent. Okay. Hi, thanks for letting me present to you today. I'm really excited to present to, I believe you're artists, which is fantastic because I never get to present my work to artists, and it's usually to social scientists or other theorists in the social sciences. I'm Darren Ellis and I work at UEL. I'm cluster lead now of social and community work. My main research has been in the psychosocial field, and I've helped develop a program here in psychosocial studies, which is now called psychosocial community work. I trained to be a psychotherapist in an earlier life, and but I got more interested in sort of researching emotion, which is a big part of psychotherapy. And I went on to do a PhD in trying to kind of understand how people construct themselves through narratives, and particularly through emotional kind of narratives. And I've also been interested, you know, because when I was doing my PhD, there was a big kind of turn to language, right, which is, you know, still important today. But the body seemed to be quite neglected out of this, you know, for various reasons. And I was kind of interested in kind of what is going on as well under the skin. Because to me, emotion is quite a complex subject, right? And to look at it in any kind of one particular way perhaps reduces it. And so my research was looking at stuff like autonomic nervous system activity, you know, what's occurring under the skin in the autonomic nervous system while people are talking about emotional experiences and traumatic experiences that they've had, and kind of making correlations to these, to the narratives and to how people construct themselves through this kind of endeavor. So I did a lot of kind of background research on emotion and became really quite interested in the subject throughout my PhD, and ended up writing a book called The Social Psychology of Emotion, which you know, it's kind of an introduction to emotion theories and concepts. I've always been interested in the different ways that people conceptualize emotion and affect and feelings, and particularly throughout history. I've been interested in, you know, really early ancient understandings of what emotion is and how that's kind of tied up with, you know, sort of values and morality and ethics, you know, because emotions are seen to sort of lead us, for example, towards kind of vice, right? Whereas sort of cognition and rational decision making is seen to be the stuff that's closer to good moral decision making practices. And that's really sort of been embedded into more recent 20th century social psychology and psychology, which tries to sort of see the individual as the rational cognitive being, right? And a lot of this messy stuff around emotion has kind of been under-theorized, I think, until relatively recently. But that doesn't mean to say that there weren't really interesting theorizations and conceptualizations of emotion that were developed in sort of, you know, the early ancient periods and the medieval periods. And I sort of look at some of those theories and how they have been systematically kind of cut out of more modern social psychology, because they're enmeshed in mythology and theology and metaphysics, right? Whereas psychology wanted to see itself as a rational kind of science. And I sort of talk about that journey really throughout this book, and look at different understandings of emotion. Going on from that, I've kind of been interested in affect theory, yeah, and I've done some work with Tony Sampson, who you might know here, and he's done a lot of research on emotional contagion and how that kind of traverses through social media. And we wrote a book together with Stephen Madison, and I did some research myself and sort of got asked, did some interviews, or I had an assistant who did some interviews for me, and I analysed those interviews. about people's understanding of social media and effects that it has upon them. Okay. And I was looking at stuff like, I was asking them about what they consider to be personal information, and more particularly how they use emoticons and emojis. And I talk about that in this book a bit more, that research that I've done, and I use process philosophy to kind of investigate it a bit more, something that I'll talk about a little bit today. You know, and a lot of my writing now sort of is positioned within the process philosophy kind of field. More recently, I've written a book with Ian Tucker, who works in psychology, over in psychology, and that's Emotion in the Digital Age, Technologies, Data and Psychosocial Life. And a lot of the talk today is going to be about that, not just about social media, but about this thing that that's been kind of noted today as artificial emotional intelligence, I suppose. And more recently, I've just got a book published yesterday, funny enough, came out yesterday, that I wrote with a colleague called Angie Vowella, and it's our experiences of the lockdown. And I was quite interested in my relationship with technology throughout that period and how it sort of grew and kind of how that's affecting me. And I was looking at, I've been reading another process philosopher called Gilbert Simondon, and he talks about, you know, this kind of individuation process that humans go through, yeah, and we're constantly in a state of individuating. We never actually reach actualization, I suppose, in that sense. But he saw machines as being central to this, and our relationship to machines as being central to this. He's writing sort of in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And yeah, and so I found his writing really, really influential, and he talks about sort of, you know, machines either kind of helping us to individuate or actually creating more alienation. And I sort of think through some of that through this book, particularly with my relationship with presenting online as I'm doing today, right? And I can't see or hear any of you, so, you know, I sort of feel that I'm in my own little bubble here. So I don't know, you could not be watching me for all I know. But anyway, I'll go on to what I'm talking about today. I'm not quite sure how much time I've got, but I know it's 2:15 now. So today I'm going to be stepping back a little bit and looking at what, you know, this thing that we call emotion. How has it been understood? And I'm particularly interested in this book in different conceptualizations of emotion and how they've been implemented into technology, into, for example, social media, into artificial intelligence, to try to create emotional intelligence in machines. So I'm quite interested in some of the conceptualizations that they draw upon in order to develop these things. I hope you find some of that interesting today. I've also been interested in, you know, therefore, how it's been digitized and in what ways has it been digitized, okay? And also, you know, not just about how emotion is put into technology, but how it's affecting us, right? And how our engagements with machines are being processed. And I've looked at a lot of kind of motivation theories that have been used to think about our attraction and our engagement with digital technologies. And then I'm going to go on to talk a little bit about kind of cognitive computing and the distinction between, I suppose, you know, the digital and the analog, and how there was a kind of a cognitive revolution in psychology that had a particular understanding of what the individual was that came from computing, and how that's kind of affected their models and their views, and particularly in and around this discipline called affective computing that I'll look a little bit at and kind of deconstruct it a little bit by looking at some of the roots of affective computing that has come from Manfred Collins, who's a real key figure in effective computing and has really influenced the way it has developed. But he's a much lesser known figure and kind of on the margins of the literature. But I found him really interesting. And then just a bit more about kind of some of the research that I've done on emojis and emoticons, and thinking about sort of how these models have been more particularly implemented into social media. I hope you're with me. I'll carry on. So, as you'd probably expect, there have been a number of different models of emotion that have been used in psychology, but some of them have come to the fore and had more dominance than others and influenced the field in particular kinds of ways, which we'll look at. And many of the kind of theories of emotion that we see in psychology have kind of stemmed from neuroscience and biology, rather than social psychology or the psychosocial field, which is an area that I've been more interested in. So, you know, for example, evolutionary theory, going back to Darwin's work, where he looked at emotions and its effects in humans and other animals, where he develops a basic emotion thesis and states that there are a number of hard-wired emotions that are genetically passed on to us from age to age, right? Back to the animals. And he said that these are not necessarily useful for modern day humans, actually, the emotions that we have. You know, that actually they're more useful for our ancestors. So, you know, a famous example that's often used is, you know, why do our hairs stand on end when we are frightened, you know, or fearful? You know, what purpose, what evolutionary purpose does this serve? You know, and so we might think about that and we think, well, actually, you know, it doesn't seem to be serving any purpose at all. I barely notice my hair standing on end myself. But Darwin would argue that actually, you know, this was useful. For example, if you look at a cat when it's frightened, how it arches its back and its hairs stand on end in order to look bigger to an approaching predator, right? So it served a purpose in our mammalian kind of ancestry, I suppose, but doesn't serve that much of a purpose for us and actually kind of get in the way of modern kind of activities, I suppose. This was Darwin's thesis, and it's been sort of brought into psychology to some extent, where until relatively recently, kind of emotions are seen as sort of noise in the system, if you like, right? Sort of leading away from good rational decision-making practices. Another model that's often used now is a two-dimensional model, where you can see there's a little two axes where you have an axis from unpleasant to pleasant, and from deactivation to activation, or arousal, if you like, you know. And you can see there in those four quadrants, you know, four main kind of affects, if you like, because it's usually called affect in this field, in the two-dimensional model, between arousal and valence. So the kind of valence is the form of the emotion, if you like happiness, sadness, whereas arousal is the amount of, and this model is often used. And both of these models, particularly the first model, underlies a lot of the theorizations and conceptualizations of emotion that have been sort of built into artificial systems. Myself, I'm more kind of interested, as I've already sort of suggested, in kind of process-oriented approach, which is a lot more kind of complex, I think, you know, and a lot more difficult to configure into technology. You know, it's about sort of you might call it a multiplicity of an assemblage that give them meaning, the different ways in which emotions emerge for us, you know, which incorporate beliefs, memories, perceptions, and attitudes, and all kinds of phenomena, which are individualistic to us and incorporate our cultural background, our social surroundings, of course, our biology, and a lot of psychological phenomena. And I talk about the kind of the complexity of emotion in my books a bit more. And so I feel that these models that are presently being used are relatively limited, but they have appeal. They have a lot of appeal to developers for reasons that we'll talk about. So some questions that we might ask about kind of digitizing emotion, yeah. How can it be digitized, therefore, if it is so complex, right? Can we make machines emotionally intelligent? This is something that the industry is very much striving for at the moment, right? To try to make machines emotionally intelligent in different kinds of ways, right? And the notion of digitized emotion, I suppose, is kind of contradictory, isn't it? You know, sort of we often think about emotion as more analogical than digital, you know, consisting of ones and zeros, but it's something that is not mappable in that kind of way. And but still, you know, it's been important for them to try to capture it, identify different kinds of emotions, recognize it, you know, and stimulate, of course, in us, the users, different kinds of emotions. And I'm sure as artists, you'll be able to tell me a lot more about that than I can. So another line of questioning as well is not just how we can, you know, put emotion into digital technologies, but how they maybe engage us, right? How we imbue technologies emotionally, how we engage with technologies emotionally. Yeah, do we imbue it with emotion? With emotion? You know, how do we become emotionally attached to? I know I've become certainly emotionally attached to a lot of my technology that surrounds me. In different kinds of ways, in many kind of unconscious ways, you know. And you know what they've been interested in industry, you know, trying to look for what emotionally drives us towards, for example, using social media. And I've done a little bit of research around this on motivation theory, you know, and I've looked at the different motivation theories that have been used to try to understand people's engagement and, you know, attachments to digital technologies, particularly social media. You know, three of the most prominent that I found in the literature when I kind of did a review of the literature out there was psychological ownership theory, uses and gratification theory, and social capital theory, among others. Of course, there are many more, but these are the three prominent ones that have been used. I'll just give you an example of psychological ownership theory. So psychological ownership theory really works quite well in terms of thinking about our ownership and how we attach ourselves to our own social media, for example, presentations of the self and our own kind of the platforms that become our kind of second home, if you like, right? So it refers to a feeling of possessing and being psychologically tied to an object, an external object out there, right? So it's a psychological kind of attachment, yeah. And without in the absence of any kind of formal ownership. So you can see how this might be important to somebody, for example, who doesn't have that many material possessions, but they can own their own, you know, presentation of themselves on the social media that they use. And so social media companies have been really interested in this. So, you know, there are different ways and three main motivators, I suppose, that have been looked at in relation to social media, and that's efficacy and effectiveness and need for self-identity and need for having a place, which we'll just very, very briefly go over. As you can sort of see, you know, having a place, these are sort of seen as drives, if you like, these needs, sort of instinctual needs that social media in some way can fulfill, right? You know, so that we are born with these drives, and if we can't fulfill them in the material world, social media offers us a way to enable that fulfillment, yeah, of these drives, instinctual drives within the self. So you can see there, it's already drawing on a model of kind of what the subject is. So having a place fulfilled in social media through having, of course, a virtual space of your own, such as your own profile page, where you can manipulate and make your own for others, and it's your own kind of space, right? Coming to know the self. This is seen as well as another kind of innate drive that we have. We need to sort of know ourselves, and I think it's quite true in some ways, but social media affords us the opportunities, to come to know about ourselves and define and create and construct our identities, if you like, right? Of course, for all the things that we do on social media outlined there. This notion as well of kind of maintaining a continuity of the self, that we used to have, for example, I remember I was quite interested in my own family photographic albums that we used to keep, and we'd update every holiday or annual kind of event that occurred, where you'd have these pictures that were developed in the chemist or for your Polaroid camera, and you'd stick it in this kind of laminated book, and you'd have an account of not just yourself but also your family membership, your family as well. I suppose a lot of digitization of our photographs kind of taken that away to some extent, but we can now place them on social media, and it gives us a sense of continuity of the self, I suppose. What I've done though is I did a kind of overarching view of all the different kind of motivations that have come out of these different theories that I found in the literature, and I found sort of 5 overarching forms of motivation and loads of different sub motivations within that. Motivation for using social media, for social networking, for garnering information, to develop the self, to escape from everyday activities, and of course enjoyment. And I'm sure there are many more, but these are the main overarching ones that I found in the literature. And of course this has been really good for social media technicians, and developers, to be able to categorize our motivations in these particularized kind of ways. Seeing that there are a fixed number of categories of motivations that therefore can be used to help navigate, for example, algorithms that are developed. Social media platforms capture so much data, right? Untold amounts of data that I can only dream of having myself. So they need some way of chunking it up and categorizing it and quantifying it, right? To make use of it so that it can be sold to marketing companies, for example, so that they can get clients and show, what's motivating people to use platforms, etc. What is emotionally engaging people. So it allows, for example, for them to make sort of cognitive maps and schemas, which kind of cohere with computer scripts and the production of algorithms. So they're always trying, and psychologists have really been interested in this as well, since the sort of birth of psychology in the early 1900s, to try to dissect the human mind and human behavior in these categorical kinds of ways, right? And so models of the self that have come out of cognitive computing sort of really comply with these sort of social media data chunking processes that have occurred over time. Okay, so we've had kind of this sort of cybernetics revolution in psychology that kind of happened in the 1940s and 1950s, where the human mind and the human brain was akin to kind of the computer, where we have software that goes in, but the computer is kind of like the brain, if you like, the hardware of the computer. And this is the first kind of digitization of the brain, and it coheres in a sense with our biological makeup, because we're our neurons are made up of kind of synaptic activities, right? So where a neuron is either switched on or off, and that adheres to sort of binary digitized kind of information, because, you know, a computer, either it's on a 1 or off a 0, right? And our brains kind of seem to be compatible with that and sort of mirrored this model, and they're all over it, the cybernetics psychologists, sort of trying to map the mind in that kind of way, using computer models to map the mind through this binary sort of cognitive computing. So this is also based on this sort of rationalist idea and a rationalist version of intelligence, that intelligence is made up of these very formal kind of processes, if you like, yeah, and very rational. And much of the development in emotion and understanding of emotion didn't really feature in this work, right? It was seen as sort of, you know, again, animalistic, primitive, involuntary, you know, kind of stuff that we need to get away from, right? And it just adds noise to the system, okay? And we need to, you know, the rational being, like Spock, needs to have control over emotion, okay? And so, you know, there was much more of a focus on this computerized cognition, if you like. However, a branch, you know, much later in the 1990s emerged sort of from a person called Rosalind Picard, who developed this affective computing lab in MIT. And this is a model, a computerized model that is able to kind of capture and understand emotion through, for example, facial expressions and bodily expressions and text and speech and physiological data. Picard was really interested in that. And so trying to create emotional agents, if you like, in computerized systems that interact emotionally intelligently with human beings. And it recruits these models of emotion that we'd looked at previously in order to develop this affective computing program. And so I've gone on to sort of analyze these models and think about how they're used in affective computing and other areas. So I just want to step back a little bit and think about sort of what it came out of. And it was Rosalind Picard was the main proponent of affective computing, who wrote this initial book on a watershed book on affective computing, which has really influenced the industry. She named it affective computing rather than emotional computing because she wanted to appear rational and scientific and not just another woman looking at this messy stuff called emotion. So she tried to kind of scientize it and give it sort of, you know, a more scientific sounding kind of name she talks about in her book. But she developed her work in MIT when she was looking at image processing. She was really influential in developing Google imaging processes and algorithms, etc. And she was thinking about that in MIT. And so doing stuff around kind of pattern recognition, yeah? How do computers recognize patterns and how can they kind of be built into search engines? So interested in this stuff around kind of decision making and perception, how we perceive stuff and how we make decisions to look at that particular thing, right? And I think, you know, there has been a move in the 1990s to sort of think about how emotion and affect, I suppose, influences our decision-making processes. They can't be separated. There was a guy who wrote a really interesting book in the 90s called Antonio Damasio, and he was really quite influential in looking at how, and as you know, theories from ancient times have sort of recognized that emotions are massive and are not just irrational, and they do play a big part in everyday rational decisions that we make. And we can't see them as just noise in the system, but need to really focus on them and see them as really being extremely influential in everyday activities. Yeah. And so she went on to sort of think, I mean, it's David Hume, he's one of the Enlightenment philosophers that said, you know, reason is only the slave to the passions, I suppose. And early Aristotelian theory and Platonic theory looks at how emotion is really important to decision-making processes, and they can't be abstracted out, right? They shouldn't, in fact, be abstracted out, because they can be developed through good habits, etc., and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, she saw emotion and affects as being vital aspects of perception and decision making, right? So how we perceive something, how we notice something, how it draws our attention is emotionally driven, right? And you guys will know a load about that kind of stuff, you know, and perception is fundamentally biased by our feelings. You know, we don't just see in a cold, rational way, we feel stuff that we look at, right? That's what draws our attention. And we emotionally select what to focus upon. Yeah, bright colors, distinct smells, loud noises, quick movements, buttocks, she talks about, you know, but emotionally bias our attention. It seems quite obvious to us, right? But it wasn't to these computer scientists. So she had a fundamental belief, Picard, for computers to be truly intelligent and interact with humans, in other words, to develop artificial intelligence will require emotional intelligence, the capacity to recognize and express emotion. The capacity to recognize and express emotion. I love this guy, Manfred Collins. He's really eccentric and quite mad. And he only died about a year ago. And it was interesting. He died around the time I was writing about him. And he's a lesser known subject, but really he was really influential to Rosalind Picard and the whole affective computing movement. Yeah. And he has quite a kind of spiritual understanding of emotion, or what he calls Cybernetics. Yeah. So Picard sort of saw that actually emotion and affect, in the way that they understood it, was not sufficient enough, you know, to really describe the processes that she was interested in. Okay, and so she adopted the term Cybernetics, which comes from this kind of eccentric understanding developed by Collins, who was a polymath, right? Collins, he was a really great musician and was interested in the effect music has on the individual psyche. And he also sort of thought that emotions are adapted and adopted at different epochs in human history for spiritual means, okay? So, but what he did, and I'm going to talk about, he was one of the first people to sort of measure emotion in a quantitative kind of way through his development of the centigraph machine, okay, which he believed could measure centric states. So a quote from Collins, he said that the age of reason had driven a painful wedge into his being, dividing him from himself as well as his fellow beings and the natural environment. So he wants to get away from this age of reason, which he thinks is kind of in some way infected and you know, alienated our psyches from our this stuff that he calls Cybernetics, or sort of kind of emotion. So Cybernetics is a fundamental attempt for him to reunite people's divided nature. Yeah. And Cybernetics states for him then are genetically programmed. Okay, so they're, you know, they come from genetics and can reveal the simple elegance of nature's plan within us. Nature's plan within us. So you can see there, he's a bit of a creationist, yeah. Although he mixes this with his kind of with evolutionary theory, which usually are kind of poles apart. So the communication of emotion is designed according to specific laws. Specific laws. We can discover a new sense of belonging to nature and recognize our common brotherhood. If only we got back in touch with these Cybernetics that buried deep within our psyches that we've kind of become alienated from through the kind of age of reason, through suppressing them and repressing them, I suppose. So he, as I sort of said, he reckoned that centric states developed in separate stages of evolution. Yeah, and it also said that, you know, these centric states are in some way, and I haven't really got my head around how this is the case, but evidence of design in the universe, of God's design, right? So he said physicists admire the elegant design implicit in natural law, that in fact appears to be a source of its beauty, as well as the awe and wonder which physicists often experience. Why then should we not permit ourselves to accept the possibility that design may be implicit in the more complex molecular organization? Okay, I know I'm kind of going off track a bit, but he actually was the first person to develop this notion of the cyborg. Yeah, him and another person, actually, weirdly, called Klein, who he wrote a paper for some really high impact factor journal in astrophysics, I believe. Yeah. And he was like, there was a lot of thought around this time in the 1950s and 1960s about sort of space travel, okay, and he was interested in how the human kind of goes into space and how they deal with being in space, right? And so, you know, his notion of the cyborg was him thinking about how we can alter human bodily functions that, you know, are required for space travel. So the cyborg deliberately incorporates exogenous components, extending the self-regulatory control functions of the organism in order to adapt it for new environments. Yeah. So he then uses his notion of sentics, and he sees that there are these kind of particularized sentic states that, you know, we should get in touch with in order to maintain psychological health in space, right? And we need to go through this kind of meditation that takes us through a sentic cycle and experience this cycle over a half-hour period. And like Darwin and like Paul Ekman and other psychologists in the basic emotion theories suggested that there are these hardwired kind of sentic states, and we have the capacity to develop more. So, for example, he saw the states as being no emotion, anger, hate, grief, love, sex, joy, and reverence. Yeah, and this is the most human of emotion is reverence, okay? And he said naming these sentic states enables one to have more control over them. And so we kind of do this meditation where we name the state again and again and again for a number of minutes. And then, you know, this state is then experienced as well, okay? And he suggested actually there are more sentic states that are yet to be actualized in the future of humanity. But importantly, what he suggested is that essentic states have particular essentic forms, signatures that are related to them. And we could find those signatures through developing computer programs that are able to measure our feelings and our experiences through the center graph. And so we would have a unique signature for love, hate, grief, joy, reverence, anger, and sex. Okay, thinking about these things, right? And so he developed a center graph where, you know, emotion and sentic states can be measured, but through the middle finger, okay? And you put your finger in the center graph, okay, and you put pressure on the center graph through the vertical push down and the horizontal push as well. And you think about these different sentic states. And what happens, and he reckoned this occurs across cultures and across nations and across different people, what happens is we have a signature emerge, you know, through the center graph that represent each of these different states. Yeah. And these are, you know, really sort of evolutionary kind of developed in us before speech, before we were able to name them. But now we're able to name them, and culture has kind of given them more significance and a signature through our language systems. So, you know, there has actually been support. I mean, it sounds mad, right? It sounds crazy, but there has actually been some support for his work. I mean, Jack Panskip is a very world-renowned affective neuroscientist who's sort of top of the field of affective neuroscience. And, you know, he states that his pioneering work into emotion is argued persuasively, and it calls for our attention on the topic. And it captured actually his own attention and influenced his work. And of course, it affected Picard's work. Picard had read a lot of Klein's, and of course, she was interested in how he had managed to develop computerized models of these centric states, which are kind of to some degree akin to basic emotions. Yeah, and so following his work begins to use actually the term centric modulation to try to understand how emotions can be expressed in measured and computerized and chunked up into different forms that can be therefore digitized and implemented into computerized systems, you know. And she suggests that this could be done, for example, and so does, you know, Klein suggests that, you know, it doesn't have to be measured through the finger, but can be measured through all different parts of the body. Okay, but it's just that he managed to develop the centrograph. And Klein and of course Picard is interested most particularly in facial expressions, but also measuring it through voice intonation, gestures, movements, postures, pupillary dilation, heart rate, pulse, temperature, electrodermal responses, respiration, muscle action potentials, and blood pressure. Of course, the more measures you can have, according to affective neuroscientists, the more, you know, valid your understanding of that particular expression will be. So from centric modulation, you know, she devises these systems, and MIT, you know, gets lots of funding for developing different technologies that could perceive these centric modulations. You know, and machine learning is employed to read and aggregate affective data. You know, so for example, one of them is the Galvic Tabita. Okay, so it's a glove-like thing, which is now actually a watch that could measure, you know, certain physiologies like sweat that goes across the eccrine sweat glands, right? This is seen to be related to autonomic nervous system activity. A certain kind of sweat is excreted through these glands, which again have been evolutionarily wired into us to, you know, when we get anxious or nervous or frightened, our palms begin to sweat. And this is a different kind of sweat, which is more conductive than other kinds of sweat, right? And of course, this is seen to help us to escape through the trees and stuff like that when we're kind of, you know, faced with a predator. So it has evolutionary significance. And that's one way that quite often emotion is measured. But this Galvanac Tabita was able to, you know, measure different forms of physiology. And, you know, most of the work and most of the money has been plowed into, you know, facial recognition expression or facial expression systems, yeah. Where, you know, of course, this is related to Darwin's and Ekman's work, where we have, you know, 6 or 7 facial expressions that are related to particularized kind of emotions. And, you know, this has been developed into an app which you can download called Affdex. Doesn't cost anything, and you can look into this app and it will tell you whether you're feeling sad, happy, mad, or bad. Well, not mad or bad, but actually happy, sad, disgusted, etc. So Affdex uses these about 6 emotional classifiers. You can see me there using the app on my iPhone. And this is based upon Ekman's facts labeling system. So Paul Ekman is a Darwinist. He follows Darwin and he sort of takes on his research, Darwin's research from the emotional expression in man and other animals. Darwin actually used photographs of expressions, facial expressions, and went around different cultures around the world and showed these pictures to different, cultures. And he suggested that there was universal agreement among different cultures and different nations and tribes, etc. Even tribes that hadn't yet, come into contact with the Western world, that they were able to see these particular emotions as, the way that we understand them as happiness, sadness, fear, disgust, which gave him, the understanding that these are universal and hardwired, right? So, the model of emotions as physiological phenomena grounded in bodily facial expression has been really important to the development of creating effective computing and recognition computerized systems that are able to tell us what we are feeling and thinking. That it's an old ancient saying that the face is a mirror to the soul, right? It tells us what's going on in our inner worlds, okay? And actually, quite often, if we can only read the micro expressions, we will know what's going on underneath. And this has been, beautiful for effective computer scientists, because they want to know what's going on within us, right? And being able to tell us, even if we're not aware of what we are feeling, they can tell us what we are feeling and thinking, of course, and tap into that for all sorts of reasons, yeah. And this research that sort of Darwin had done, and then Paul Ekman subsequently, is kind of the common view, yeah, or a dominant view of how emotion is expressed, and we have these certain basic emotions, yeah. But a lot of theorists have seen this as really kind of a one-dimensional model, which I would agree with. It tells us something, but it's much more complex than that. So people like Lisa Feldman Barrett, who's quite a neuroscientist, and has actually written a really interesting popular science book, which isn't too difficult for the layperson to read, about how emotions are made. And she's really well cited and is a proper neuroscientist, right? But she takes what we might see as a constructionist neuroscientific approach, yeah. So emotional activity comes from the brain and body, but also incorporates the social and cultural influences. It is a co-production, okay, between kind of what happens within us and what happens around us and between us, yeah. Emotions, not just passive reactions, but active constructions pertaining to the context through which they emerge, yeah. So she says here, an emotion is your brain's creation of what your bodily sensations mean in relation to your context. So this brings in the notion that stuff like anger, fear, anxiety, and all these different kind of feelings and emotions are created in the context, and the context includes the social world, the cultural world, and our subjective experiences, yeah, our own unique experiences, which perhaps we have our own unique signature for the emotions that we express, feel, and understand. Okay, and it can't be just understood in this universal way, which simplifies it too much, yeah. But she suggests, and as we do, there's a kind of fervor that emerges in relation to new technologies that are being made, yeah. And it tends to mask these critiques, for example, and more complex and nuanced understandings, in this case, of emotion and motivation, yeah. But if they are able to help machines learn, yeah, and recognize and create subsequent algorithms, yeah, this is what's important for a lot of the developers, rather than the complexity. They want to chunk up data so it can be used in a systematic way where it is, analyzed, computerized, and calculated. So I suppose, effective computing market is a kind of contemporary version of what I've seen as the scientization of emotion, and that's something that I talk about quite a lot in my earlier book, particularly when psychology started to think about emotion and neglect a lot of these much more complex understandings that have come out of from ancient philosophers and medieval and Enlightenment philosophers. It kind of abstracts that away. And this time for not just to create a science called psychology, but to commodify emotion, to make it useful in the marketplace. And so effective computing market has grown to a predicted $53 billion industry. Yeah. But we shouldn't really blame Rosalind Picard for this. I mean, she did have good moral, ethical intentions when she developed it, right? She wanted to develop it for social goods, and actually does right and warns about the potential for it to be used by governments to manipulate and control its subjects' emotions, to manipulate and control our emotion. And I mean, what's more scary than having a machine that can emotionally manipulate us, right? And understand our emotions. I mean, it can be used for all sorts of dastardly things. And she stated that she developed it, for life-enhancing applications such as helping autistic children develop emotional skills. So, for example, you can have like a pair of glasses that a person could wear, and if they find it really difficult to understand the emotional expression that the other person is having, these glasses will, flash red, green, or blue or whatever to sort of signify what emotion the other person is expressing, And it provides software designers with feedback on users' frustration levels, assigning points to video game players to reward courage or stress reduction, producing learning models that stimulate curiosity and minimize anxiety, and analyzing emotional dynamics in the classroom. So all these kind of positive things that it can be used for. I was invited to a sort of an event, a roundtable event, 2 weeks ago, with Facebook, TikTok, and other big social media companies and developers. And we were talking about, emotion, and they're kind of worried now because, there's been research that has been done relatively recently that shows that, for example, Facebook, which we can't use Facebook anymore. We have to use another term. I can't remember what it is. But anyway, Facebook is reducing people's well-being. Yeah. And so, they want to look at how, we can begin to re-understand Facebook and market it as not being something that reduces a person's well-being. And I forgot where I was going with this, but, they were talking about sort of, the good things that Facebook can do. For example, these groups that you can join where, you can talk about your mental illness, or you can talk about, being frightened in certain situations, and and can actually enhance people's well-being. So they're really interested at the moment in sort of trying to develop their platform so that they are perceived as being, enhancing particular what they see as positive emotions. And it reminded me of a kind of dystopian world, where we're only allowed to kind of express positive emotions, right? Stuff like happiness and joy, but we have to kind of neglect fear and sadness and anger, which are really important parts of being human, right? And where sometimes they're kind of polarized as seen as negative emotions, and you have the positive emotions, Brave New World, I think it was the Adolf Huxley book, where he envisages this sort of utopian dystopia, if you like, where people are taking soma tablets to increase their experience of happiness and joy so that they don't experience sadness or frustration or anger anymore. And it kind of reminded me of what they were sort of doing or trying to achieve through social media use to some extent. So effective use in computing hype, some of the ways that it has been used. For example, at the moment, there's what's known as higher view coding assessment. And it's sold as a technology to help companies distinguish, who they should employ and who they shouldn't employ. So it's known as pre-employment testing, and video interviewing platform. Yeah, they can tell apparently if the interviewee is tenacious or good at working in a team through, detecting particular kind of hidden emotions that may be being expressed through these micro expressions that the face is producing. And of course, they use the camera to identify these micro expressions. Yeah, and it's being used at the moment for border controls, cars, toys, marketing, insurance, policing, and of course education. Yeah. And it's often touted, particularly by these futurist kind of writers, and and actually seriously being developed at the moment, that we're on the verge of developing an emotion chip that will become the base unit for the emotional economy, running in the background in an array of technologies generating an emotional pulse, yeah, detecting what we are feeling underneath the skin. Scary. So, nearly wrapping up now. So the psychological models underlying emotional intelligence are often weak, and so likely, in my opinion, and some of my colleagues' opinions, to induce many false positives. Yeah. But of course, the lure of being able to obtain information about the individual that is hidden and secret, that which is unconscious. And, they use the word authentic quite a lot. What is the authentic self? Can we get to this kind of false masked self that has been presented to get to the true authentic self that underlies it, right? And so this technology is seen and touted as being able to do that, which is, really attractive, yeah? For example, I did some work in my book on sentiment analysis, and you must have heard of sentiment analysis now, these computerized programs that are sort of do opinion mining and sentiment kind of analytics to look at, how we express ourselves through text, and so can reveal, whether we are attracted to something or not. But these are quite simplistic models, yeah, that either tell us that we are feeling either negative, positive, or neutral. Yeah, and so it's kind of reduced this complexity, this vast complexity, into three kind of statements, I suppose. And similarly, some of the work that I've done on emoji and emoticon analysis has revealed many problems with attempting to understand, how emojis are being used. Because quite often they're being enculturated in very specific social, cultural, and subjective kind of ways. I did some research into sort of the development of different emojis and emoticons, and relatively recently, Pixar's Matt Jones was hired, and a Berkeley professor of psychology, Daisha, to help develop emoticons for Microsoft. Okay, to develop more sophisticated, emoticons that, which display sympathy and other complex kind of relatively more complex emotions, but still based on Darwin's basic emotion universality theory, where you have primary emotions and secondary emotions and social emotions, for example. But again, Feldman Barrett has critiqued this, from her neuroscientific constructionist perspective, where she says, there's a whole spectrum of emotions, and they're gradient and fluid and complex and not simply wired. I mean, if we think about the term emotion, it derives from the lattice motus, to be moved, right? It's about movement. It's about kind of, moving from one state to the next, to the next, to the next, okay? It's never static and can't be represented in this kind of static way, yeah? But emotions are about movements, they're dynamic, yeah? And so, a lot of these facial expressions are quite stifling, a way of portraying feelings, yeah? And they're divided into these relatively arbitrary categories, which have been critiqued by critical psychologists over the years about this, hardwired understanding of what emotions are. But again, they're commodifiable because they are quantifiable. They create really good chunked up pieces of data that, you know, computer scientists can use. So social media process analytics, understood through discursive processes related to the commodification of the self. Okay, so, you know, Deborah Lupton has written some really nice stuff about the quantification of the self and effective capitalism, for example, which is driven by the desires of marketers, right, to facilitate and create social sorting so that we can categorize people in different ways. They form feedback loops that are really easily hooked into, yeah, bite-sized data, easily processed. Some of the people I've been interested in to think through some of this kind of stuff and to bring back the complexity. A theorist such as Albert North Whitehead, Deleuze, and Simondon, who, you know, get us to think about the complexity and the process-oriented nature, the movement of dynamics, for example, of emotion or effects. Yeah. So invites us to think about what we consider as real, as an actual entity of a present moment that is always moving from one moment to the next, a bit like an animation, right? But we can't actually catch hold of the here and now because it's always moving. And so, you know, we shouldn't really be thinking about individualized artifacts in the world, phenomena, but should think about them being made through these different dynamics of processes. Yeah, it's a different way. It's a real revolutionary and radical kind of psychology and philosophy and a way of thinking about the world. Yeah, things are always in flux and in states of becoming, rather than being actualized as a particular thing, which we, you know, our psychology and our experience of the world through, you know, language has taught us to believe. So it's quite radical to start thinking in this process-oriented way. And I've been thinking about social media in this way, not being understood as being, you know, promoting representations of the real. Okay, but again, it's performative and active, and indeed shapes our world. And perhaps, you know, more importantly, particularly in the way that emotions have been kind of constructed through social media, what is that doing to us? Is that constructing our understanding of emotion and therefore our way of expressing? So a question, do you think these models of emotion that are being supplanted into technologies are impacting upon how we use, understand emotion? Rather than the machines replicating our emotion, perhaps we are replicating the way that technology is attempting to replicate our emotion. Worth thinking about. So digitized emotional capitalism. I realize I've sort of run over a bit here, but please stop me if you want me to stop. So I've only got a few slides left, I think. So the translation of sometimes, you know, ineffable, that which we can't really talk about or find difficult to talk about, difficult to express, difficult to symbolize. And again, you guys would know much more about that than I would. And effective processes into digitized form is a tricky business and appears to have multiple effects, you know, so, you know, it's really worth investigating. So for example, the simple emoticon were initially designed to reduce complexity and ambiguity of a text. Okay, so, you know, there was a particular computer scientist who was developing sort of forums. He was one of the first people to develop, you know, use the internet as a forum and engage the students, not the World Wide Web, but just his students on his closed kind of systems. And when they were writing, they saw that, you know, what they were writing about, the text that they were using, was sometimes really quite ambiguous, yeah, and may be perceived sometimes as offensive, okay. And he started using this kind of sideways emoticon, the smiling face with the two eyes, to, you know, to ground really and to supplement meaning. That, you know, this is only a joke, or smiling face, to show that actually, you know, that not to take it too seriously, or I mean it in jest, or I mean it in a way that I'm smiling about myself. But through effective capitalism, you know, now they're predominantly used, emojis and emoticons, as a tool designed for commercial benefits. How many clicks do I get on that emoji? How can I analyze the data through happy and sad emojis, etc.? Nash, who's really worth reading, argues that digital technologies, particularly social media, exploit beliefs of individuality and agency prominent prior to the digital age. You know, this notion that we are kind of agentic and free and not influenced, you know, in these particularized kind of ways. They exploit that. So to conclude, so everyday activity with our relationships with technology is imbued with emotional and affective activity as it attempts to pull us in and hypnotically engage us. I mean, you know, well, I was quite surprised when I went to this roundtable with the different developers last week on, you know, this tension between developing platforms that facilitating people's emotional well-being, but also, you know, the imperative to make them as sticky as possible, right? So that you return to them again and again and again. And of course, these two things are often incompatible with each other. You know, in order to increase the revenue, to increase the advertising, to make the shareholders happy, you have to increase the stickiness of the platform. So a lot of motivation research suggests that digital technologies fulfill any number of human needs, leading to what humanistic psychologists call self-actualization, that we can become individuated, yeah, through using these kind of digital platforms. We can fulfill ourselves, you know, for example, as I discussed in the various motivation theories. Although, of course, there may be many benefits, I'm sure you do, and I do, I love it, yeah? But it's not benevolent, right, by any means. We don't just express stuff on it or with it, but it actively shapes experiences. And it is agentic. It doesn't simply fulfill needs, but importantly, it creates needs, yeah? So as long as profits increase, it seems that not too much else matters. Or am I being too pessimistic, perhaps? So I think social scientists, artists, and philosophers have important roles to play here and must not be kept out of the loop. As technologies develop to capture, replicate, and manipulate emotion, we must be on the ball and ensure that it is developed for human ends and not just for profit. Okay, thank you. I hope you're still there.
Hey Darren, so hopefully you can hear us. Let me try and, I don't know whether Craig can flip the camera back if I, Craig might need to come back and actually fix this, but Craig, do I just need to start my camera? There you go, brilliant. You've only got a little bit of the room there, but let's see if I can move that. Oh, there you go. We've got a few people left back in. Here we go. So I don't know if anyone's got any, I don't know who, has anyone got any questions for Darren?
Thanks for staying so late, guys.
They're all looking pretty shy. So, well, maybe I'll just finish up and say thanks very much for Darren for delivering that. I think it was really, just a different kind of perspective. And I think, you know, university is about kind of these different ideas and Jeff generally, you know, really acknowledging that we have, you know, real experts in the field we want to expose you guys as artists and designers to as much of that as possible and to those diverse kind of ideas that are going around, so you can engage your work with, you know, with the platforms that are going around in the world. So So I don't know. You all look like you're probably first years, so you're probably finding your feet in your degrees. But yeah, it's kind of about kind of opening your eyes to maybe some of the bigger or more important questions that our researchers and fellow colleagues are really listening to. I don't know if you've got anything to add there, Darren.
Well, I mean, I'd love to hear your views, and I'd love to see any of your work. If any of you wanted to send any of it to me, I'd be really happy to have a look at it or to take the conversation a bit further. I'm in Docklands campus most Wednesdays. In fact, I'm at home today though. But you can always contact me through d.ellis@uel.ac.uk, or if you can't remember that, the name Darren is quite easy, and that also works, darren@uel.ac.uk. So thank you. It was a privilege to present some of my work and thoughts and ideas to a group of budding artists. I presume they're a group of budding artists. I kept saying that, Dan. Is that
Yeah,
right?
they're all visual artists. So we've got graphic designers, fine art, photography, and illustration students, as well as some other subjects that fit in between those. So those a bit more broader. But yeah, we've got quite a selection here. Yeah, well, no, thanks very much, Darren. And just to add to the students, like obviously Teams is a great boon for finding people because you just have to type in Darren, and it'll probably come up on the address book. So that's always another nice feature. But yeah, no, thanks again for delivering that. That's really fantastic. And we'll sign off. Maybe you can wave. I'm not sure what camera we're looking at. This one here. Brilliant.
Thanks,
All right, cheers, Darren. Thank you very much.
Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Cheers, then.
Have a
Bye-bye.
nice day. Bye.